Hi, and welcome back to From the Burbs to the Tetons. So this video is going to be about how to restore an old deck. I'm pretty good with working with wood and doing anything wood related, so hopefully the stuff I have to go over here with you will be informative. So originally when I first started the project, I figured I'd be doing, I think a 4-phase approach. First one would be power washing it, getting all the old stuff off as best as possible, and then using a stripper to strip off anything that was left over, and then using a wash to neutralize the chemicals and also get any excess stuff off the deck. And then the final one would be to go ahead and stain it and put 2 coats of stain on it, and possibly painting it instead of staining it. There's a whole chart on, when should I paint versus translucent stain / paint versus staining. And what they recommend is anything over a couple years old, you don't stain it. The wood is too inconsistent to take the stain properly. And then, like 2 to 5, and I'm doing this from memory, and it depends on the company that your product you're using, use something translucent, and then after 5 years old you paint it. And the reason you do that is the wood, after it gets that old and has been through a reasonable amount of abuse, you don't know how it's going to take the stain. And this deck has 3 levels to it, and so one level is fairly well protected and in good shape, one in about 10 years old. Another level is about 10 years old and not in very good shape. The one around the swim spot, it has been getting wet from water and people walking around on it after swimming and all of that good stuff. So it's not bad, but it's not great. And then the lower deck, it's like 20 years old. So the age of the wood, the quality of the wood in different places, really all over the place. So that's what I'm kind of dealing with. Now, at first we were going to paint it, but the owner, after I did a little section of it, hated it. I went ahead and re-stripped it and took that off. And so we were going to go ahead and stain it. They were really worried about the staining and how it would turn out. And, I've stained 1,000 things. I know how to go ahead and blend it and touch it up and make it look pretty good. While I was testing, I ended up doing one test of a color and then another test of a color, and the lighter color showing through the bottom of the darker color really looked nice, two-tone, but it was on a decent piece of wood that had been replaced in the last 10 years or so, and well, it's just in good shape and it took it great. You can even see there, where I'm working, there's a fairly new piece of wood that was replaced too. But there was some bad wood too that I had to replace, and here's a little video and me describing what the wood was like and what I had to do to replace it. Okay, so let's take a good look at this. I know sometimes on the camera, these angles, you can't see it, but it's and it's soft in the middle there just by pushing on it. So our choices are, well, we can't take it back to there. We need to take it back to at least here, but there's another cut right there, and they've kind of tried to go out of their way not to have multiple cuts right next to each other. So the next one is out here. So this is where we want to go ahead and, is right here. So that's where we're going to cut and take out that run and put in a new piece of wood. So this was fun and interesting because there's rafters there that are fairly old, 20, 25 years old, and I don't want to damage the rafters, so I'm trying to be very careful about trying to get to the nails, pull the nails out so I can pull the whole piece of wood out. And going through all of this, one of the things I realized is, boy, do I wish I would have had a chainsaw, because I could have used the tip of the chainsaw to push a hole through and then just leave like 2 inches, and then I could have pounded the pieces of wood from the side to knock them off, and then left just the nail in place. The upper decks, because they're newer, they were done by a contractor that believed in screws, so there's a lot of screws in there, but at the time they were using those square top screws instead of the T's, the T25s that most people use now. So this was very interesting and took me quite a long time to get out, but I did not damage any of the rafters that were underneath of it, and I do eventually get it out. Now, some of the other things I did too is there's a bench behind it. That bench actually has the wood already cut and in place that's new, but it's just sitting there waiting to be stained. I don't want to get the pieces of wood in place before I finish doing all the cleaning of the wood. It doesn't make sense to put stripper on brand new wood and then have to clean it. So I'm cutting it all, but once I get to the point of doing the stripper, I'll just take those away and leave them out of the way. There's another board over next to the swim spa that had to be replaced as well. Attention to when you're picking out wood is knots, and also where they're located and whether or not it's completely straight. I think you can see here, let's put something straight down near it, and you can see how that end is all screwed up. But I picked this piece of wood anyways because the center was good. This is 8 feet long and I need about 6 feet. So there was a knot near the end, which I cut off. Normally I wouldn't get a piece of wood with a knot that close to the end and the edge. So I knew I was going to cut it off. I knew I was going to cut this off, and you can see the middle is actually pretty good. And this is the upside. A couple of knots, but you know, that's just the way it is. You can't get knot-free wood anymore. So here I'm doing a final fitting and measurement. I always like to measure in place. I'd rather put a tick on where I'm cutting than measure with a tape measure. You never know when you're just going to do some math. You think a 68 is a 58 or a 58 is a 78, and you just completely screw up the... I'm cutting a joint, so what I'm doing is I want the top piece to be very snug, but I don't want any imperfections lower down, so I'm doing just a tiniest bit of a angle on the cut instead of 90 degrees. The original wood for the corner handrail area there was in really, really bad shape. I tried to repair it a few times by adding 2 or 3 or 4 extra screws and gluing it and everything, and it was just not staying in place. So I thought this was the perfect opportunity to replace it. So I'm trying to go ahead and strip the old stain off. I did power wash it to get the big chunks off, and it's just coming up really, really slow. This is the second coat on the top up here. So let me just show you. The sun comes from this direction. So this 3 to 4 feet next to the house pretty much stays in the shade all the time. Same thing for 2 or 3 feet over there near the deck. Not the whole time, but you know, they get an hour or 2 of sun each day. So one of the things I did is I used this tape to protect the side walls because we're two-toning it basically. You can see up here, put the tape in place. I did staple it in place because I didn't think the tape would last with the water and everything. So, and then I used this outdoor waterproof tape on the rails going down the steps and around here. You'd have to pretty much coat these things to get them to, and leave them for a long time to actually get a stain on them, which is possible, and I've got some touch-up. This is the second coat here. This was right up, it's movable. So those are where the steps normally go. And you can see underneath of it, mixed bag of loosening up the stain. I'll show you what I've been using. Sorry if I'm moving a little fast sometimes with the camera. I forget. Not trying to make you guys dizzy. This was a bad piece of wood that I cut out earlier. I think I have video on that. Now, bare products is what's being used on this deck already. So the owner asked to go with it. This is what I'm using to strip it. Yeah, the directions are kind of weird on application. They tell you what not to do, but not so much what to do. So, this is the game plan. There were areas where it was clear that the paint was just sticking too well. I believe this is loosening up that paint enough, because even though I was scrubbing it with a brush, and I think you got to use a steel brush, not just a regular bristle brush, you know, it would come up. And you can see where this is the first coat. I'm just leaving it longer. The other thing is too, is I read someplace you were supposed to wet it down and then use these products on it, both the cleaner and the stripper. But after reading the application again, I don't see where it says to wet it down, so maybe that's what I was doing wrong. Natural bristle brushes or lamb wool applications are not recommended. Due to the product thickness, do not use a pump, which I used and it worked fine. Directly onto surface, apply liberally until nylon poly brush or roller. Natural bristle brushes are not recommended. Well, maybe that's why it's working slower, is because I wetted it. The moral of the story is, after you review 5 or 6 products and read the directions on 5 or 6 products, take the time to read the directions on the product you actually purchased. There were several that wanted you to put it down, wet it, and then let it sit. Unfortunately, the bare product wasn't one of those. I did get all of the stain off and everything. I did have to power wash some of it a second time to get it really off. Now what I'm doing is I'm trying to cover the pool to keep from stuff getting into the pool, because I'm kind of doing the final cleaning and stripping of everything, and I need as much of the wood available for power washing and chemicals and that kind of stuff to finish things up. And then also I don't want the cleaner to get in there either. The plastic was more for keeping the stripper off the railings. I didn't want them to spot. I didn't want to have 2 or 3 or 4 inches of them where I had to restain them, because the stain that I was able to find does not match the stain that's already there. So that was just more work I would be creating for myself. So the plastic did what I wanted it to do, because I think I only had to touch up maybe 10 railings. Now what I'm doing is using a roller, trying to see if that's going to work any better on the areas that still need, or still had, a bit of stain left. The stuff that up against the wall was kind of the worst, because the wall protected it from the sun, so it didn't get as much wear and tear on it. So I really spent a lot of time doing that shaded area up against the wall on the swim spa area, and also on the upper deck. So now I'm doing the second power washing, having a bit of fun over there. B2T, kind of the Burbs to Tetons shorthand. And you can see that, you know, you can really see where there was leftover stain. I mean, you can see it coming up after 2 coats of stain remover, power washing it, spending quite a bit of time doing that. I don't know if you can tell, but there's the other piece of wood that I had to replace right up against the railing there. it was in pretty bad shape too. So there's one of the replacement pieces of wood. And I replaced this area. It had warped really bad. I put some screws in place which helped, but there wasn't any reason not to replace it now, since I was in the middle of doing all this stuff. And then this piece of decking down here just deteriorated as I was power washing it. Got a huge hole in it, so I replaced it. Now, I guess I could have cut it off here, but if you notice the one right next to it's super short and it would have kind of matched. This was actually one full piece. And on this side it was here, so I went one more. There was no reason to replace the end up here. And I sprayed down here with cleaner. I've sprayed up there with cleaner too, but I have some left over. So I'm just going to put it down and then I'm going to spend time rinsing. Once I finished rinsing everything, I let it dry for a day, maybe two even. And then I went ahead and I came back and I started putting the first coat of stain on, which was a light kind of browny golden stain. It was going to be the first layer, and then we were going to go ahead and do a two-tone with a darker layer on top of it, and the undertones were going to make it look kind of oldish and antique-ish, which I think it did. But because of the age of the wood, I kind of had to put three coats on, well, 2.5. One coat was this golden brown tint, which I thought was very pretty and did a good job of giving it a good base color. And then one full coat of the kind of walnut color, and then a touch-up coat, which probably touching up a good half to 2/3 of it to kind of like even out the color. Now, I did not even out the color on the lower deck, which I was more than happy to do, but the person I was doing the work for had just decided that, hey, I want my deck back, and I'm okay with the way it looks down on the lower deck. I spent most of the time doing the edging, I guess the cutout work if this was painting. But you know, once that was done, things went really quickly. The main part of it was easy and quick to do. I'm bouncing around a little bit on this because I don't think you want to watch me do every single stroke and every single roller push and all of that good kind of stuff. So one of the things that the instructions recommended was, and even the people at the paint store who do this stuff for a living, sell it for a living, said to use one of these flat brush paint things, not a roller. But the and it did a good job. And I also went with the grain. I didn't try and go cross grain. I mean, sometimes I had to. I didn't have a choice because of the edge and the way they put it on is at an angle. But it, I think it went on pretty decent for the first coat. Now, one of the problems with this being such old wood is that they weren't flat. They weren't even. I didn't go in and sand this down like you would a hardwood floor to make sure everything was even. So there was a lot of wood sticking up from the side where there was 1/8 of an inch or 1/4 of an inch that you could see in different areas. And going back through and trying to stain those without overstaining what I did on top was really, kind of a pain in the butt, which goes back to why a lot of these places want you to either do a semi-clear kind of paint stain or out and out paint, because that stuff covers up real easy when you're painting it versus a coat and a half of stain on it. So that's just something to think about. Here I'm starting to finally put on the second coat of the darker walnut, and you can see in areas where I've already completed how it shows through real nice. And this changes a lot based on it drying. When you first put it on, it looks really dark, and just even a couple of hours makes all the difference in the world on how it shows through. And then one of the things that I would do completely different that would not have really been a big issue if this was new wood is I would not have done the edge part on its own, the entire area. The lower deck, eventually what I started doing is I paint the middle and then do the edging, a 3-foot area of it, and blend it in while it was all wet. And it worked out a lot better in areas. Now, I only did that in just a few areas, so it didn't, there's definitely parts on the lower deck you can see where I didn't do it. But here I'm going through and now doing kind of the touch-up to kind of like where it's blotchy and evening out the tones. Some areas are really dark already, so I'm just kind of skipping those, and then the areas that are light, I'm putting a second coat on. And again, this was expected, but you can even see on the edging here that's right in front of my feet where it's pretty dark on the edge versus, the middle area that was really easy and smooth to do, and I didn't spend as much time on. So, if you're going to do an old deck, I would definitely think about trying to, do the edging and the middle part where you're working at the same time where they're wet, and you can get a closer saturation rate between the two. You might be wondering why I have the fan there. The fan is for me. This is middle of July, Virginia, so the temperature could be 85, 90 degrees out there with 75 to 80% humidity. A lot of times, especially when I'm power washing and everything, you see my wet t-shirt and everything. That isn't from the water. Some of it is, but 80% of it is from me sweating. So here's the completed job. The homeowner went ahead and painted these panels. Get them all cleaned up. And I think the deck looks good. You can see the lighter color coming through the darker color, which is the effect they kind of wanted. Up here, they've always had a rug up here of some sort. just because the deck gets really hot. So you can walk around barefooted. I went ahead and I think I taped chipping that out, but that was all cracked and screwy, and so I went ahead and chipped that all out, got it clean, and then did that today. It's one part of my final work. I still have to come back this weekend and hook up the grill. I don't have a helper to get it up on the deck, but yeah, I think it turned out good. I think I would do that chair built-in bench there. I think I'd do that built-in bench a little bit darker, but the client said that's good enough. They don't want it any darker than that. If you have any questions or comments, please put them down below. If you like the video, please give it a thumbs up, and please subscribe and join us for our journey out to Idaho.